You're listening to The Extra Real with Ger Brown
and Colm Ryan for a look at the bigger picture of film.
with films from around the world,
Through the decades,
from movies you know and love.
to movies you need to discover.
This is our January roundup, and what we're going to look at today are basically a lot of the newer films that we've watched over the last 6 weeks or so. We're going to tear straight into it because there's a lot to get through. We're going to start with Colm and Ger's Pieces of a Woman, which is a Netflix release. It's been getting an awful lot of press recently. We've both watched it. I think most people already know what it's about, but it's about what happens when a home birth scenario goes wrong and the impact that has on a woman and on the rest of her family.
We are kind of reaching that time of the year where you're going to start getting the films that are up for awards coming through. And I think Vanessa Kirby's performance as Martha Weiss is definitely up there. It's definitely what you want to see in a kind of a nominated performance, which it probably will be, I imagine, because you can see she puts absolutely everything into it.
Yeah.
But it's also a brilliant kind of, as the film kind of goes on, it's also kind of a brilliant internal performance, I think.
Yeah.
Because she's going through an awful lot, obviously, but she kind of seems to internalize her emotions really well.
Yeah. Like, one of the things I liked about the film, and one of the things I've liked about Mandrusco's other films, like I've seen White God, and I thought that was a unique film. And what I feel about his work is that he's supremely confident in the medium that he's working, and his films, they're really slick, and he seems to know what he's doing from scene to scene, and there doesn't seem to be a problem in connecting all the dots. That being said, while I was watching it, I was worried that this was going to turn into a piece of pure misery porn where it was just going to be wallowing in its own misery. But it doesn't do that. But as I was watching it, I was going, are we never going to come out of the downer moments? Which, look, that's fine if it fits a certain type of film. And there are two scenes in this film that really stand out for me anyway. There's the 24-minute home birth sequence, which is a staggeringly good piece of filmmaking, and you've got the courtroom sequence. I thought both were equally harrowing. In fact, I thought that the latter was more harrowing than the much lauded birth scene.
Well, I think, the home birth scene is probably what a lot of people are going to be talking about. I mean, I'm not sure if it's one take, but the camera kind of keeps following people throughout it and stays within the house, and it goes through every single emotion possible. Like, it goes from real happiness to intense sadness, but you do almost feel like a fly on the wall, don't you? You feel like you're there and you're experiencing it with this young couple, it's very powerful. I almost feel, for me, I feel at times I felt almost that maybe the film struggled in a sense because it had gotten you so emotionally involved, and then you're dealing with the aftermath of that. And I wasn't sure if it really got back to that level, if you know what I mean.
And that's the criticism that an awful lot of people have. Like, in some ways, it's like, clearly they did an awful lot of rehearsals. I think they did 6 takes, and I think it could be the 4th take that's used. I think what I really love about that sequence is there's a scene where LaBeouf can't find the phone, and I think that was a mistake, but they kept it in because it felt so natural. And that sequence, in some ways, could be the type of sequence that nearly takes you out of it, because, these long takes, whether they're fully a long take or a manufactured series of takes cut together. And I think in this case, it is one long take. It can actually take you out of it by calling attention to itself, just because it becomes so obvious sometimes when you're... But what I do like about it, and it kind of reminds me of like long argument sequences, like in films like Possession, Andrzej Jalowski's film, when the camera stays on an intense moment like that, the moment really exacerbates in its intensity. So I think that really worked, and it ramped it up to what it could. And then, does the film dissipate after that sequence? I think the midsection of the film has, I don't want to say problems, but it lumbers perhaps for a bit. And what I found interesting was that when I expected it to really wallow in real misery, it does give us a very hopeful ending. In fact, more saccharine than I expected. And I was torn, because in some ways I thought that the ending needed to be like that, but I was also feeling, was it a fraction too saccharine? So that's the only thing I'll say, that it was a really accomplished piece of work. There were things that I really admired. It's a brilliant piece of filmmaking. Is it a brilliant film overall? Maybe I'm not 100% sure yet. I think I need to see it again. But yeah, Pieces of a Woman, I definitely think it's certainly not for everybody. New parents probably won't want to watch it. And I think it's a film that's dominated by a trio of performances. Vanessa Kirby, 100%. She owns this film. But Ellen Burstyn is really amazing in her own way. And then LaBeouf. And he's got a couple of difficult scenes. There's a scene which is essentially a rape scene. And I found that really difficult to watch. I found his performance strange, because I think sometimes you talk about, where actors are allowed to improvise and do things, and sometimes I find, and I'm not too sure exactly what sort of relationship he had with the director, but sometimes you get the feeling that sometimes an actor they're either not being as controlled as much as they could have been, and that was the feeling I got with some of LaBeouf, that you're getting LaBeoufisms coming in. I mean, I've liked him in some things recently, like American Honey and stuff, and I think some of his indie output, and I don't mean Indiana Jones output, has been interesting, and I think it's nearly reinvented him as an actor. That being said, I thought he was good in this, but I'm reserving whether or not I thought he was great. I did feel there was a level of lack of control around him. But that actually feeds into the character then. So, a difficult one. But I do think it's Kirby's film, really.
Yeah, no, it's very much kind of Kirby's film. Ellen Burstyn is phenomenal, though. I can't believe she's 88.
I know. If she isn't at least up for Best Supporting Actress Oscar, I don't know why she wouldn't be,
And she's just able to kind of like, in a scene, just the way she's able to change her emotions, and kind of a lot of these kind of standoffs she has with Vanessa Kirby's character are just outstanding stuff, really.
Yeah.
I do get what you mean with LaBeouf. He's very much one of those look at my acting kind of actors, I think.
A little bit.
He's got a lot of tics and stuff like that I noticed that he does, and that kind of, there's at times where you want to see an actor disappear into a performance, and I don't feel that happens with him sometimes. I feel like, I'm watching Shia LaBeouf acting rather than I'm watching the character. Do you know what I mean? So I kind of did feel that here with him. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, so One Night in Miami. This is something that you watch.
Yep. So the play by Kemp Powers and made into a film, and directed by the actress Regina King. And the One Night in place is 25th of February 1964, where Cassius Clay, who would go on to become obviously Muhammad Ali, beats Sonny Liston. And he is good friends with Malcolm X, here played by Kingsley Ben-Adir, who invites him to his hotel room. And when Cassius gets there, he thinks, oh, great, we're going to have a party and stuff like that. And he also invites Jim Brown, who is just in kind of that period where he's going to go from an amazing NFL quarterback into an actor, and Sam Cooke, the singer. And really, it's kind of like just about these four men, where they are in their lives and stuff like that, like where they are with the civil rights movements. There's kind of a lot of friction between Leslie Odom Jr., who plays Sam Cooke, and Kingsley Ben-Adir as Malcolm X. There's kind of a lot of friction between them and where they see themselves on this kind of on the side of the argument, really. But the four actors are all brilliant. I mean, Eddie Gorey is Cassius Clay. He has that kind of arrogance, that kind of panache. He kind of has that kind of great movement on him. Alice Hodge, Jim Brown is just this big hulking guy, and he's really kind of softly spoken. But for me, it's Leslie Odom Jr. as Sam Cooke. Like, he sings towards the end of the film. He sings a song, "A Change Is Going to Come," and the performance is amazing. I mean, Leslie Odom Jr. was also in Hamilton, and although I wasn't a huge fan of Hamilton, maybe just watching it, I think I'd love to kind of see it live. He has got such an amazing voice and is some talent. And it's a really kind of good like four-hander. You always worry about films that are like based on plays. You always worry that they're gonna, I don't know, be too stagey or something like that. But this kind of has a bit of like, the characters do start to move around and stuff like that, and sometimes scenes just kind of explode, and it's really really good. I'd really recommend it. And
Cool.
I think it's Regina King's first film she directed, and it's really well done.
Speaking of a film with stage origins, like Pieces of a Woman was also based on a stage play. How did you feel that circumvented the stage origins?
That was kind of different, I think, because you had, I think what gave that the kind of this kind of, you know, where it had this kind of changes in time with the kind of the picture of this bridge,
Yeah.
the kind of image of this bridge. And I think as it kind of kept kind of moving forward that way, it kind of had that kind of more cinematic feel, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it gave it, I suppose, a little bit more space to breathe and took away from the claustrophobia of some of the scenes and the interiors. Cool.
Definitely.
Right, next up is Summer of '85, which, look, you know I'm a big Francois Ozon fan, and this is his latest film. It's an adaptation of a book by Aidan Chambers, Dance on My Grave. And look, I think it's one of these films that are I think Ozone came across the book when he was really young, and it's, you know, it's kind of hard to talk about this piece without comparing it to something like Call Me by Your Name. I don't think it quite hits the heady heights of that film. And really what I found myself focusing on, so this is about basically this young guy, his boat capsizes and he's rescued by a guy called David, who ultimately ends up being this friend of his, and they kind of start a relationship together. And it's about what happens when, well, at the beginning we're told that this isn't your standard type of story, and it's not going to be an easy ride the whole way through. And so we're dealing with, like, there's an investigation of a death, and the main character, Alexis, played by Felix Lefebvre, is drawn into it. And it's, I suppose there was a lot of elements that it kept kind of reminding me of Ozone's work as a whole, and it kind of reminded me of Ozone's inspirations. So like, I know Ozone's a big fan of Eric Romer, and it kept reminding me of films like Pauline at the Beach and stuff like that. But then it also, you know, Ozone's own work seemed to inform it as well. So there are aspects that you kind of, that any fan of Ozone's films will have kind of come to recognize. So, for example, things like gender identity is played with. There's even a prop from one of his earlier shorts, a short from 1996 called The Summer Dress, which makes a cameo. Dance is used in an emotionally engaging way, particularly at the end. Again, as in The Summer Dress, as in Water Drops on Burning Rocks, and films like Petite. And then the gender, the narrative device. So storytelling is used as a narrative device in this, as in films like In the House, Swimming Pool, of course. And so all of those aspects, so it becomes almost like a kind of a greatest hits type thing from Ozone. And it's very stylish, it's very easy to watch. And also you've got some of his stock character actors. So you've got Melville Poupeau and Valeria Bruno Tedeschi, both who've been in a couple of Ozone's films. It's slight. He's kind of been in this territory before. It isn't it isn't the new Call Me by Your Name, but it is pretty solid. It's very entertaining. It kind of riffs on that 80s nostalgia. I think it does it well enough. I think it's a very easily accessible film, and as I say, not his greatest work, but very easy to watch. Would I recommend it? Yeah, I would.
Has he gotten to a stage where if he's referencing other stuff that he's almost overly referencing himself now?
Well, I hope not. With this, I think he possibly could be in that territory. But with his other recent films, I don't think he's gone there, and he does seem to change it up tonally, like L'amour double and I keep getting the last one mixed up with Of Gods and Men. Hang on. Yeah, by the grace of God, and like that was pretty good and solid, and kind of almost like a social realist piece and a kind of a Ken Loachy kind of vibe. No, I think he's one of these directors that can turn his hand to different styles, and this just seems to have kind of I think it's almost like he's using his shorthand, and he's just, I think there were elements that probably just appealed to him that happened to, maybe, like, he read the book when he was young. I'm not too sure what kind of connections there are between the book, what differences there are between the book and the film. Obviously, the book is set in England, but there are things that I'm sure would have informed his creative mind over the years, and maybe there are aspects in that. And I think maybe, I think he was a student of Romer's, and so that's obviously left an impact on him. And anything around a beach or something like that, with kind of young people coming of age, will definitely remind someone of Romer's films, particularly Pauline at the Beach. And you've got those elements running through this, and so I think it's hard to decipher, is to give you an answer to your question.
No problem.
Yeah. So no, but I'd recommend it. It's good, but not great. And okay, so The Vast of the Night.
The
Talk
Vast
to
of
me
the
about
Night.
this.
So this is kind of a science fiction film directed by Andrew Patterson. I think it's quite low budget. I think the budget was somewhere like about $1 million, something like that. And basically, one night in New Mexico in the late 1950s, a switchboard operator and a radio DJ discover a strange audio frequency which could change the future forever. And it stars Sierra McCormack as Faye Crocker, and she's a switchboard operator, and Jake Horwitz as Everett Sloan, who's the radio DJ. And I must say, like, it's mostly a two-hander. Like, these characters do interact with other people, but it's mostly about these kind of two actors and their kind of journey. They hear these kind of strange audio frequencies, cause the radio channel to like completely die, and this guy Everett, he kind of sets off on this kind of journey, asking people around the town, seeing what the hell is this about. And what's brilliant about it is the look of it is amazing. It really captures that kind of 1950s kind of small town kind of look. It's got like exceptional kind of camera work in it. Like, the camera kind of seems to glide at times, and you're wondering, oh, is that like some kind of extraterrestrial force? The camera almost becomes that. But the two actors, they kind of have this great like back and forth, and that's the real kind of like, that's the real strength of it, I think. And some of the dialogue is very small town type dialogue, so you kind of have to kind of keep up with what's going on. But I think ultimately it does kind of like pay off, and it's a really kind of fun, like 90 minutes kind of science fiction film to watch.
Cool. Sounds pretty lean, which is perfect for that type of thing. So would you say it's is it kind of confined in one place, or?
No, it kind of moves around this kind of small town the whole time, but it kind of does stay around like 3 or 4 locations.
Cool.
There's a kind of a really cool scene actually where they're in like in this kind of school where this like college like basketball game is about to go ahead. Mm-hmm. And the kind of blocking and stuff like that, the way everyone moves and stuff like that, it's really kind of beautifully done. You feel like it's a much kind of more expensive kind of project when you watch it. Mm-hmm. No, I definitely recommend it, definitely.
Cool. And for our next one, we're stepping back a couple of years. This is from 2018. But again, it's one of these films that's just been hard to get to see so many things. As we've said on previous episodes, you'll know about more films than you'll actually get the chance to see. And so we're kind of late to the party with Shoplifters. So this is by Koreeda, and I haven't. Do you know what? I realized I haven't seen any of his films before. He's
Oh,
had a
yeah, I'm the
film out
exact same.
with Juliette Binoche and Ethan Hawke out recently, but I uh, hadn't seen any of these films. So
I think he's one of those directors you maybe read about more, like say
absolutely,
or he's like one of those guys. If you like this film, check out this creative film. But I was the exact same. I looked through his filmography and I was like, I must have seen one of his films before, and I haven't.
yeah. And this is a film that like it got a lot of praise. Some have called it a masterpiece. I think it would be a great one to watch side by side with Parasite. Maybe that might be too much of the same sort of thing.
No, I got the same as well.
It's maybe a bit more nuanced than Parasite, although to be fair, Parasite's pretty fairly on the ball as well. They're two great films. So it's basically about a family living kind of on the outskirts of society, kind of in the underground, and I think it develops. It's a kind of a. It wouldn't be unfair to call it a slow burn, but I wouldn't call it a slow film either. Like,
No.
it takes its time to kind of gather the different narrative elements together. But once they start clicking and you start realizing different elements, geez, it's like it gets more and more exciting. Like it really does build. So basically, they're a bunch of small time kind of shoplifters, and they've got a bunch of kids. But how many of the kids are their own is
Yeah.
one of those elements that kind of comes into it. They also adopt a child from who's basically been left out.
Adopt is kind of
in a small time crook sort of way of adopting. The opening sequence where they're shoplifting is just incredible. It's just brilliantly shot. Beautiful use of just playing with the depth of field and stuff like that. What's in focus, what's out of focus, and what is the focus of your attention as well. I thought it was. I think it. You know what? It's one of the visually. It's one of the strongest sequences in the entire film, and it just hooks you from there. And then it's just the petty bickering between the family and all that sort of stuff is just great.
that's fantastic.
Yeah, so I again, this is one that I thought was really well worth to watch. There's not much you can really say about the actual plot as it develops, because it's one that, as it reveals itself, that's kind of the important parts of it, I think.
Yeah, me too. And I think it's kind of just through little bits of dialogue you get to kind of get. It's almost like a detective novel or something. It's just little bits of dialogue and stuff like that. It just reveals itself.
What we can talk,
we don't want to talk about it too much and reveal the kind of the turn or whatever that happens in it.
But what we can talk about are the performances. Like, they're great across the board, and it's just the casting is also something that's really interesting. They all look like they belong in their roles, and there isn't a convenient wrap up either, like which feels right for the type of thing that it is. So Shoplifters by Koreeda, definitely worth a watch.
No, very much recommended. Yeah,
cool. So then Creep is something that you watched.
Oh yeah, sorry, Creepy. Yes,
sorry, Creepy. Sorry,
yeah,
Creep is what you are.
Jesus,
that's what I am. Sorry.
I don't belong here. Anyway, Creepy from 2016. A bit like Koreeda, Koichi Kurosawa is one of those directors. I'd seen films of his before.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen one of his films.
Yeah, Tokyo Sonata being the last thing I'd seen of his. So it'd been a while since I'd seen one of his films, and this popped up, and the kind of the story really grabbed me, and I was like, oh, I haven't seen one of this guy's films in so long, and I really enjoyed some of his stuff, like Pulse and Cure. So it's basically about a detective who suffers a knife injury and quits being a detective and goes to become a college lecturer. And while he becomes a college lecturer, while he moves to a small town to become a college lecturer, he encounters kind of this cold case within the area, which he starts to kind of investigate. And then he also has this neighbor, Nishino, who's a bit creepy, put it bluntly. It's a strange film. It's definitely like one of those films where the guy who plays Nishino, Teruyuki Kigawa, puts in a masterful performance, because a lot of his interactions aren't actually with the detective Nishijima. Takakura. They're with the detective's wife. So a lot of his kind of interactions with her are very strange. Sometimes he's really friendly, sometimes he's really like obtuse and a bit weird, and it's a really strange film. I don't think it could get made anywhere outside of Japan, if I'm honest. I think it just has just a certain kind of style to it that if it got remade, it would just be an absolute disaster. I will say this: it does kind of build and build, and then when it does kind of reaches kind of crescendo in the last kind of hour 45 minutes, it goes absolutely crazy, and it's not for kind of faint of heart. It's a bit gory in places, a bit disgusting, but it's definitely a really interesting watch, very interesting watch. And I was glad to get to see some Koichi Kurosawa again.
Cool. Right, and we're sticking with Japan. This episode is really, as we were talking about earlier on, turning into Japanuary. Silent Voice.
Yeah.
So this is one that was sitting on my Netflix hit list for watch list for quite a while. This came out in 2016 in Japan. It's by Naoko Yamada, and it's a really striking anime that I think once you kind of get into it, I mean, I put off watching this for quite a while, and I don't know why. Maybe it was the length, that you're just kind of investing 2 hours and 10 minutes or whatever it is into something which is essentially about bullying and what I initially thought it was going to be about was more about just this deaf girl and how she deals with being bullied and what happens next. But it's so much more than that. To the point where I actually think this is a film that more people need to see, and it's a film that there's so many different levels that I need to talk about this film, because on the one hand that there's the story side of things, which is really, really strong. The writing's great. There's obviously its origins as a manga piece, but also just from the production side of things, that like it's a film that it has its origins with, I think it's an all-female team as such for the most part.
Yeah.
So go on.
The manga by Yoshitoka Oyama, directed by Naoki Yamada, you said, and then the script by Reiko Yoshida. And it's like, for anime to have like an all-female team, more or less, is really rare.
This is not just one of the Studio Ghibli efforts. This is coming from what is essentially a new studio, which is Kyoto Animation, which I think is run by a female team. So again, I suppose it definitely has a different feeling. Visually, it's really interesting. The editing's great, and I just think it deals with topics that you don't see dealt with every day. It's got a kind of an epic feeling that it spans like over about 5 years. So you're seeing the development of different characters. Maybe that's something that maybe the initial manga maybe had more time to cover. But it doesn't feel like this is rushed, really. And I think there's lots of really interesting stuff, particularly around bullies, how bullies feel afterwards when the shoe's on the other foot. So from the writing point of view, it's great. And it doesn't outstay its welcome. I thought it flows really quite well. Is it as good as Your Name? It's a different type of film. Both are stylish. Both have narratives that kind of go out, or that are sprawling. I think if you liked Your Name, I'd say give it a go. I thought this was an impressive work all of its own, and I definitely want to see more of Yamada's work.
No, definitely, and it was really interesting to kind of see a film at first from like the kind of point of view of a school bully, I guess, who then becomes ostracized for his bullying.
Yeah.
You don't really see that as much. And then that he tries to kind of amend for his ways, and you can kind of, I guess, you can kind of see things from his point of view a bit, but that he tries very hard to become a good person, but still has kind of his own issues and things going on. That was really interesting.
I just love... Yeah, go on.
No, go on.
Well, I just love that you see him as one of the lads. You empathise with him from the beginning, and before he takes part in any real bullying. Um, and there's stuff about suicide and stuff that's kind of presented from the very get go, but you don't really get the full on impact of that until about halfway through. But as I say, there aren't many animations that I've seen that deal with such serious and profound topics and do it in such a deft way as well. I thought it was really, really impressive.
Exactly, yeah. And you've certain characters as well, like the character Wenu, who she's kind of I guess, the antagonist of it.
Yeah.
And she actually doesn't really change throughout. It's not one of those films where it's going to be kind of saccharine and things like that, where it's like,
no,
this character's going to be bad at first, and then they're going to change throughout. And it's like, no, these guys, they're all kids basically, and they're not. They see it from their point of view and how things happened. So it's really kind of interesting from that point of view. Also, I loved kind of visually. I noticed as well at the start, it kind of had this kind of almost kind of blown out look to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of as it went on, it kind of got more colourful and got more kind of,
yes,
I guess, that was really cool. I loved all that because I wasn't sure at the start. I was like, oh, this kind of like looks almost too white, like white balance was too high or something like that kind of thing. But as it builds and it builds, it's kind of a really beautiful film. And it's interesting you talk about it in terms of something like Your Name. I think it'd be a brilliant kind of double header to watch with Your Name. I think they both came around the same time.
Roughly,
yeah, roughly like 2016, 2017. And I think I was saying to you, like the trailer for it, the English trailer, really didn't sell it that well to me. And but when I watched it, I was really pleasantly surprised, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant film.
Absolutely. Okay, so from there, we're sticking with Japan. We're moving on to Samurai Marathon, which is one of Bernard Rose's most recent films, which I think has been criminally undermarketed in the UK and Ireland. I mean, I've seen nothing about it really, apart from it just popping up on my feed. And
you sent me a trailer, I think, like 3 or 4 months ago.
Yeah,
and I was like, what is this? I have never heard of this. At all.
And I couldn't have given two hoots whether it was Bernard Rose or not. I mean, I love a good samurai film, but they're few and far between because, like the evolution of the Western and stuff like that, it's taken its own twists and turns, and it's rare enough that you're getting a pretty standard historical piece. You're often getting stuff that's souped up with supernatural elements, and look, those things can be great. Or you get an awful lot of sword slashing, CGI violence, which it was definitely a big trend for the last 15 years or so, but hopefully that's maybe changing again. I'm not going to hold my breath. But and also it's like, well, what can you bring to a genre that has pretty much had the same story? Like, your standard Shambar or Jedi Geiki thing is usually a wandering Ronin has to help somebody, or they've gone off the rails and there's a big fight at the end. Grand, we've seen that, so how are you going to fix that scenario? What are you going to do that's going to bring something fresh and new? And this one tells an interesting story about a particular samurai a marathon run by samurai in 1855, and we get some of Bernard Rose's regulars like Danny Huston popping up, which is great. I mean, I you know what, I kind of blind watched it in the end, and I didn't realize he was going to be in it, so it's nice to see him, even though I feel like he's never really gets out of third gear performance wise, but still he's an asset. Huston is one of those actors that I feel like when he's amazing, he's absolutely mind blowing in films like Ivan's Ecstasy.
Yeah,
and that's a film I really want to watch again. And then sometimes you're just kind of looking at him and you're kind of going, I'm not going to say that he's there for the money, but you just feel like, look, there are some parts that are more special. He hasn't been given a whole pile to do in this, and but it was nice to see him. So that was a nice start. And then once it launches into it, so essentially, the act of going on a marathon and this run is kind of seen as being possibly rebellious, and you get there's a ninja, or in the realm, or amongst the group, and he sends a message, and the message is he's got the message, he's got his facts wrong. So once he realizes that, he tries to head off the assassins that are coming to wipe out the rest of the samurai. And I thought it came to a pretty decent I thought it was a good film. I thought it like I've come from a period where in the last few weeks I've been watching an awful lot of classic samurai films. So I watched a couple of interesting ones. Hideo Gosha's Tenchu, which I'd highly recommend. Betrayal, which is not in many of the books that I've seen floating around, by Tanaka. That is one that's worth seeing. Finishes with a guy fighting 200 people. Similar to something like Sword of Doom, which I revisited as well. So it was cool. So this was kind of on the end of a kind of a real Jedi Geiki Chambara kind of binge that I've been having. And you know, I think this film, one of the things that it's been criticized for is having so many different narrative strands and so many different plot strands, kind of taking its time to come together. But the running time is really lean, and it all kind of comes together in the end. And it does deliver. I'd be lying if I didn't think it was somewhat thrilling towards the end. There's plenty of action once you get to the second half of it. Limbs and heads are flying all over the place. You've got a really thrilling Philip Glass score, and it looks great. It's really rich, vibrant colours in the film. So when it comes to, you know, samurai films, this is definitely one of the more entertaining ones. It isn't 13 Assassins, but it comes from the same producing team. And while it doesn't deliver the heady heights of that limb-loppingly good effort, I definitely think Samurai Marathon is one that people need to check out. They won't be disappointed. It is entertaining. It's very easy to watch, and it's over in like an hour and 44 minutes. Check that one out. What were your feelings?
I actually thought, in terms of a narrative, I thought it worked really well, because
Yeah.
the idea that they're leaving their town to go on this marathon, and at the same time, these ninjas from another town are coming to like kill them all, basically. I thought that like gave it this brilliant kind of ticking clock kind of element.
Absolutely. It ramped up the tension.
Exactly. And I thought the kind of story of Princess Yuki, played by Nana Komatsu, I thought her story was brilliant as well, because she kind of gets to this kind of this border control kind of place, doesn't she? And that's exactly the time where these kind of ninjas from this other town come in, and then they start massacring everybody.
Yeah.
So I thought it was... No, I actually thought it was really kind of like, it is very lean, but I actually really enjoyed that. And another thing I really loved about it was the sense of humor within it was brilliant. Like,
and that's something that I think Rose himself has pointed out, you know, that there is a misconception that a lot of period films tend to be really dour. And like, people did love a bit of a joke back in the day, and he incorporates that into it. So I think that's... Exactly, and you've got the samurais as like seen as, you know, sometimes samurais are seen like almost like monks with swords, basically. That they're these guys who are quite po-faced and so serious, and it was brilliant to see them as kind of out of shape, kind of lazy kind of guys. You know, you had that guy who was kind of like stopping to do the marathon so he could like be picked up on this little kind of little carriage by two of his other kind of flunkies. I thought that was brilliant. It had a great kind of humour in it. Best appearance by a bear in a long while.
Yeah, exactly. And it was kind of cool to see something it's kind of about the end of the samurai, basically, isn't it? It's kind of about the end of the samurai, and you don't really see as much of that. So I thought that was great.
Yeah. Yes, that whole kind of the Meiji period and stuff like that. It actually could be an interesting companion piece to... There's a 1981 film called Bushido Blade, which again deals with some very similar, with the arrival of the Americans and stuff like that, which is kind of just turned out as a kind of a piece of action fodder. James Earl Jones is in it, and Richard Boone. But I suppose we don't get as much access to those sort of films. They've been kind of done to death, you know, the end of the samurai stuff, but because it's such a key period, like that's the thing. It's difficult to kind of, like, you look at something like the Western, which occupies a very narrow period in history, you know, kind of the 1840s up to the 1910s, kind of. But like, you look at a samurai film, and it could be set in the 12th century, it could be set in the 17th century or the 16th century. They're key periods, and then you have an awful lot that are set in the 18th century, or sorry, the 19th century, and like, it's a different, tonally it's different to films like Twilight Samurai and Hidden Blade and Love and Honor and stuff like that. But it also doesn't feel like a tourist viewpoint of Japanese society at the time, despite it being directed by, Bernard Rose, which I think is admirable. Very easy to make it into a kind of a tourist piece where, nice image of a temple or something like that. But it's,
completely.
I think he gets to the point of telling the story. And I think the way they managed to actually, he directed it with a translator. I think he had some limited Japanese, and I don't think he got the script, and then it wasn't so much translated but rewritten, and then that was because he was saying that that translating English into Japanese and vice versa doesn't really work, so it was kind of rewritten a couple of times with that in mind. And I think also he very much had his mind on this was the history of samurai films, on Kurosawa, and that's why the Yuki character doesn't actually bear much of a resemblance to what actually happened in reality, and he didn't mind playing fast and loose with that. And so it bears more of a resemblance to the Yuki character in Hidden Fortress, which is a female character with a little bit more pep and spunk about her. And that's so I thought that was cool that informed the way he was working, that he was working in a very cine literate mindset. Also, look, horses exist in Japan, but when you see horses riding along in on the horizon and stuff like that, it does call to attention things like the Western itself anyway. And I found it just a very energetic genre piece and a very welcome piece. It's great to see Takeru Sato as well. People will have seen him in films like the Rurouni Kenshin films, which I also think are well worth checking out. They're a totally different style of action film to what's represented here. This is satisfying. I think maybe the climax, the very final stuff where the bad guy gets his comeuppance, maybe arrived a little bit too quickly. Maybe it didn't deliver a big grandstanding finish that I might have expected. But as a whole, it's quite good. I can't understand why this film hasn't been marketed better. It's a very easy to watch, entertaining piece of action cinema.
Thank you very much for listening. You can contact the show by emailing to extrareal@gmail.com. Search for the Extra Real Podcast on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. You can listen to the show on Spotify, iTunes or anywhere you get your podcast from.